Welcome, seekers of hidden knowledge, to the mystical realm of the occult. Delve into the secrets of the universe as we journey together into the enigmatic world of ancient wisdom. Brought to you by your guide through the shadows of enlightenment, Wisdom Rocker. Uncover the mysteries, unlock the power, and journey with us as we explore the hidden depths within the pages of forgotten scrolls and ancient texts. Prepare to embark on a journey beyond the ordinary, where wisdom transcends time and knowledge is your greatest ally. Welcome to Wisdom Rocker. Prepare to awaken your inner sage. In this video, we will be uncovering the wisdom within the chapters of
Lectures on Ancient Philosophy. Written by Manly P. Hall. Chapter 3, Illumined Mind. The Universal Savior. Light is the most appropriate symbol of manifesting spirit because it is the inherent nature of light to radiate, and this outpouring is represented by a simple vertical line drawn downward from the dot, or heart of existence. An analysis of the flame reveals its threefold constitution and their correspondence to the three phases of the dot considered in the preceding lecture. The blue, or nearly colorless, heart of the candle flame signifies the dark, hidden Father. The golden radiance surrounding this area is the bright, flaming sun who bears witness before the worlds of his unknowable Father, and at the circumference is a reddish, smoky flame representative of the Demiurgus, or Lord of the world. Because of its triune nature, fire for ages has been employed as the symbol of the threefold God. Parolatry is one of the oldest forms of religious expression. Light can also be symbolized by a globe, the outer surface of which is the hypothetical point where the rays of light terminate. In reality, light is a rate of vibration pouring off, or outward, from the heart of the vibratory ray or cause of vibration, which must be symbolized by the flame. For the sake of the analogy, the heart of the flame can be compared to the dot, the radiant light pouring from the flame to the line, and the outer darkness which absorbs the light, to the circumference or outer limit of manifestation. Consider for a moment the relationship of the ray to its source. The true flame is invisible and superphysical, but it is made discernible to the eye through a rate of vibration called light and to other sense perceptions through a rate of vibration called heat. Life, light and heat are the trinity, with life as the Father, light as the Son and heat as the Demiurgus. It may well be said, therefore, that no man hath seen the Father, for the transcendency of being is concealed behind a flaming ring which blinds all who gaze upon it. Radiance is the ceaseless effort of a central force to expand, it is the continual pouring off of sparks from an endless supply. The dot may be likened to a tube through which a mysterious spiritual fluid ever pours. The moment this fluid is free from the restraining pressure of the tube, it has a tendency, like water, to expand and spread out in the form of a huge fan. Activity is continually manifesting throughout the universe. There is a never-ending battle between the effort of all life to expand and the effort of substance to resist expansion. A concrete example of this particular point may be helpful. By means of experimental balloons, it is possible to estimate atmospheric conditions above the Earth's surface. As the toy balloon ascends, it expands until at an altitude of approximately 11½ miles it will explode, in spite of every precaution that may be taken. The reason for this is that the outside pressure decreases as the atmosphere grows less dense, until finally the expanding quality of the gas inside the balloon meets with so little outside resistance that the walls of the balloon are unable to support the pressure. We have present in nature, therefore, a continual expansion from within which is offset by a continual pressure from without. Thus, the physical nature of every organism is particularly adapted to the pressure of its environment. Man's entire evolutionary progress has fitted him to sustain the atmospheric pressure at the Earth's surface. The moment he leaves this atmospheric environment, he must readjust himself, and beyond a certain point he cannot exist. The aviator has felt every part of his body racked with this effort to meet the ever-decreasing pressure of higher altitudes. For similar reasons, explorers climbing lofty mountains frequently suffer from bursting blood vessels. The pressure at the Earth's surface is not as great, however, as that beneath the ocean, where the most powerful apparatus is required to withstand the pressure of the water. As man's physical existence is confined to a certain stratum of air pressure, so spiritually he is likewise limited to a definite plane of cosmic activity. The denser the substances surrounding the individual, the greater the pressure from without. Hence materiality continually checks the natural expansion of the spiritual and intellectual self. The less material the environment, the greater the opportunity for the spiritual nature to expand, until finally at the gate of the Absolute the little globe of individual consciousness, like the toy balloon, reaches the point where there is no outward pressure whatsoever. The shell itself is symbolic of a degree of external pressure, but when all pressure has been removed, consciousness now freed from limitation is diffused again throughout the nature of existence. Hence the Absolute represents the vanishing point of external pressure. The circumference of the sphere of being is the plane established by the inward pressure of substance and the outward pressure of consciousness. As the scope of consciousness is enlarged, the power of expansion increases and the walls of substance are pushed farther back. Conversely, as consciousness is denied expression and its impulses become weaker, the circle of substance approaches ever closer to the center of consciousness. Philosophically defined, growth is the struggle of life to control its environment, or, rather, to include more and more of its environment within the area of its own self-knowing. Perfect freedom of expression is the goal of all life. All things, both animate and inanimate, are striving for that freedom which lies in perfect expression. It naturally follows that there is but one freedom, perfection. Every creature is a slave to those parts of itself as yet unresponsive to the impulses of its internal life principle. Every individual consequently is a slave to his own material constitution. He is a prisoner held in by walls of unresponsive substance. Thus, the natural expression of the inner life principle is to refine and improve the qualities of its outer vehicles that it may the more easily control and direct them. It is evident that the more refined the substance, the more easily it is influenced by subtle forces. By a certain definite organization, consciousness equips its outer nature with organs of responsiveness, so that the lower self comes ever more nearly en rapport with its own cause. A common example is the radio, which is a mechanical contrivance constructed according to definite scientific principles which enable it to pick up vibratory rates of sound inaudible to even the delicate mechanism of the human ear. Returning to the symbolism of the line is a potential cosmic nerve ray designed to confer consciousness upon the area covered by its tiny thread-like fingers. Man is slowly acquiring control over his physical body by ever increasing the acuteness of his nervous organism, for by his nerves the various parts of his body are tied together. The nerve is an impulse carrier which gives man consciousness over a certain area of otherwise unresponsive substance. Man's nerves function far more acutely now than in ages past. They are becoming much more sensitive and bring to man much knowledge concerning the nature of the substance composing his world. As the result of this increasing sensitiveness, nervous disorders are increasing, for the finer the mechanism the greater the likelihood of derangement. The Romans termed the line Mercury, the messenger of the gods. Like the lines of the telegraph and telephone, the nerves bring the distant parts of the organism into direct contact with the central station of the brain. The nerves do not necessarily end at the outer circumference of the physical body, but in the form of etheric streamers extend outward into the aura, or intangible atmosphere surrounding the physical body. Here they continue to function in a limited degree as impulse carriers. These etheric nerve ends are continually contacting forces and forms both visible and invisible and conveying certain indefinite impulses back to the brain. Many of our so-called hunches and unaccountable antipathies or affinities are the result of curious reactions set up by these etheric nerve threads which bind every part of the lower organism of man, visible and invisible, into one solid body. The line or ray coming out of the dot may be likened to a primitive nerve giving to the dot a consciousness of the nature of its environment. It thus becomes the messenger between the center and the circumference of life. The line is the outpouring of cause into effect. The line permeates its environment with the qualities of the first innate life principle of the central dot. It is the effort of the center to include the circumference within itself. The phenomena of growth represent the gradual effort of life, which is innately perfect, to objectify its perfection and blend itself with the perfection of all. In this manner the subjective potentialities of life gradually become objective potencies or powers. Growth is really the bringing of the inside of life to the outside, a gesture from within outward, the unceasing effort of the active agent to communicate its conscious qualities to its unconscious environment. The ultimate of growth is the bringing into conscious expression all of the seed germs of power lying latent in every atom of existence. The dot contains within itself all potentialities as the symbolic acorn contains the oak tree. Every leaf that in the future will grow upon the oak tree exists as a potential power in the germinal essences of the acorn. Growth merely brings these latent potentialities into active manifestation by building into them material elements which make them apparent to physical sense perceptions. The fundamental reason for this growth is the active urge to express the potencies of self and escape the imprisonment of limited vehicles. Pythagoras said that when the triangle is once established, any problem is already 2/3 solved. The foundation of all existence is triangular. We are a threefold creation. The triangle of man consists of his spirit, his body, and the link connecting them. In its macrocosmic sense there is a divine creation, an elemental creation, and the link connecting them. Life is a divine, eternal principle. Matter, except in its absolute sense, is a temporal and transitory thing. These two are separated by the whole interval of being. They are the opposites, and between them is a neutral field where one acts upon the other, for in their self-sufficient states the two have little in common. Divine nature is essentially a part of the divine creation, physical nature a part of the material creation. In ancient symbolism it was declared that the two seas, the ocean of divinity above and the ocean of nature below, were divided, the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. The universe of divine energy above and the universe of material energy below are the substances from which are extracted respectively the spirit and the body of man. The spirit is an atom of divine substance, the body an atom of material substance, and the higher vests itself in the lower, and the product is a living thing. Presuming spirit to be the actuating part and matter the part worked upon, it will be evident that the spirit cannot control the body without the assistance of a connecting tissue wherein the irreconcilable opposites are blended. Thus, in order that the abstractly spiritual may affect the concretely material, a great hierarchy of mediatory agencies must be established. In certain of the ancient mystery schools, it was taught that there were 80,000 degrees of intelligence intervening between absolute consciousness and absolute unconsciousness, each degree representing a mediatory element or condition. Considered as a unit, these degrees represent the middle or neutral field. In alchemy, mercury, or quicksilver, is used to symbolize this blending element, because mercury accepts into its own nature other metals. In mythology, the god Mercury was the mediator or neutral power serving as the messenger between the gods above and mortal man below. Still another pair of opposites must be considered, divine truth and human ignorance. Above, in the sense of proximate to cause, is divine reality, the one great need of all creation, below, in the sense of distant from source, is man, who may achieve salvation only through the attainment of reality. Here are both the living water and the empty bowl waiting to receive it, but absolute truth and ignorant humanity are divided by a vast interval of understanding. Truth knows no man, man knows no truth. Truth is that mysterious, infinite, boundless reality, man, a mere worm existing in minutes, hours and days and spending most of them foolishly. Here the sum of the knowable is the dot, gross ignorance the circumference of the circle. That which is necessary to unite these two and thus blend them into the perfection of type is the line, the mediator between cause and effect. A simple analogy of the dot, the line and the circle with the processes of knowledge may be traced in the following manner. In the center of the circle is the dot representing a fact. At the circumference of the circle stands a student desirous of learning this fact. Between these two is an interval filled with a number of agencies, any one of which, in many cases the sense perceptions, may become the mediator between the knowable and the one capable of knowing. In order to gain a more extensive understanding of existence with its vast number of physically apparent facts, the interval is occupied by an elaborate educational system and thus, between knowledge and the student body stands the professor who acts as mediator and assists in the dissemination of the subject matter. Everywhere in nature is to be found a mediating principle which is capable of contacting both extremes simultaneously, or at least intermittently. It is most difficult to unite the abstract and the concrete in a single nature, consequently you may hear such remarks as genius is eccentric, a wonderful man, but, etc. Those who possess abstract knowledge can seldom clothe it in words understandable to others. As man attempts to elevate himself spiritually, he gradually separates himself from his material environment. To have a stature great enough to raise its head to heaven and still keep its feet upon the earth is the proof of true enlightenment. If wisdom is to instruct ignorance, it must be capable of appreciating the state of ignorance as truly as the state of knowledge. If the mind has raised itself above the consciousness of ignorance, it will never be able to impart wisdom to the ignorant. To instruct the minds of others it is necessary to approach them along the lines of the familiar, they must be reached on a thought level commensurate with their own, otherwise they cannot grasp the problems presented. Since in the universal scheme the divine mediator must have the consciousness of both the upper and the lower, philosophy postulates three manners of beings, gods, who are great centers of intelligent power, men, who are little centers with marvelous potentialities, and God-men or man-gods who act as mediators between the superior and the inferior. Thus, is revealed the meaning of that enigmatic statement of the Pythagoreans that there were three kinds of creatures, gods, men and Pythagoras, the latter being representative of the mediator who was able to bind together the superior and the inferior creations. In a similar manner the identity of Jesus, according to the Gnostic traditions, is clarified, for in some places he is referred to as the Son of God and in others as the Son of Man. As the Son of Man, he ascended out of the earth to the inheritance of a heavenly state, heaven in the sense of accomplishment. As the Son of God he veiled his sense of knowing in a mortal vehicle and descended from the mysteries of the higher eons into the state of human ignorance and was thus able to converse with mortals upon the level of their own understanding. In the words of an ancient philosopher, he who has not even a knowledge of common things is a brute among men. He who has an accurate knowledge of human concerns alone is a man among brutes, but he who knows all that can be known by intellectual energy is a god among men. Man's status in cosmos is determined, therefore, by the quality of his thinking. Quality, as applied to mental processes, is not necessarily intensity but rather refinement and delicacy. The trained scientist may reach a very high degree of intellectuality and yet lack that beautifying element which is indispensable to true understanding. Unless the inner nature transcends the limitations of both the flesh and the mind, the self can never attain to a full measure of expression. Whether a man be a beast, or a god does not depend upon his outward appearance but rather upon the clarity of his inner perceptions. Many of the most respected citizens of every community are actually ravaging beasts concealing their primitive instincts under a thin veneer of culture. On the other hand, some whom the world regards as failures possess an innate beauty which elevates them far above the level of their fellows. The gods may be defined as those in whom the state of knowing has reached a degree of relative perfection, and beasts those creatures in whom the state of knowing is asleep. Between these two extremes is man, who wanders about in a state of partial knowing, united to the bestial creation by his ignorance and to the higher orders of divinities by his dawning rationality. Between the states of knowing and not knowing the Greeks postulated the middle distance, a point where consciousness and unconsciousness are blended in semi-consciousness. Between the light of spirit above and the darkness of matter below there is the twilight zone, which is the proper sphere of mind and where creatures endowed with mind seek to read the book of their destiny by the all too insufficient light. This central twilight zone is divided by a hypothetical median line into two hemispheres. The upper hemisphere, partaking most directly of the supreme effulgence, which is proximate to it, is the dwelling place of the sons of God, the Ben Elohim of the Hebrews, or those beings fundamentally divine but who partake somewhat of the qualities of the middle distance and therefore descend to the hypothetical median line dividing the upper and lower hemispheres of the middle distance. The lower hemisphere is proximate to the dark sphere of ignorance, but partaking, to a certain degree, of the superior light, becomes the abode of the redeemed souls, the Ashim of the Hebrews. Inferior creatures rising out of the darkness of their mortal night, though they be of the earth earthy, may ascend into the middle distance and at this hypothetical median line contact the demigods who descend from the superior spheres. Thus, in the middle distance are to be found both the demigods who have descended from above as instructors of mankind and the supermen who, rising from the insufficiency of matter, converse with the demigods through the hypothetical median line. It follows that the ancients conceived the instructors of humanity to be of two kinds: 1, those who descended from the light eons of the internal causal world and, brooding over humanity, spoke through oracles and oracular souls or prophets; 2, those who through the peculiar culture of the mysteries were elevated to a state of sensitiveness wherein they became ready pens in the hands of the heavenly writers. Knowledge likewise is twofold: that knowledge which, having its origin among the celestial beings of the light world, is communicated to man and constitutes the revealed or sacred writing, and that knowledge which is evolved by man himself during his ages of struggle in the inhibiting environment of the mortal world. The wisdom imparted by the demigods partakes of that higher knowledge which belongs to the sphere of consciousness and causation, while that wisdom imparted by the superhuman, or illumined human, souls, being further removed from cause, lacks the definiteness and authority of the divinely given code. The demigods teach the celestial or inner body of knowledge, the superman, the terrestrial or outer body of knowledge. Therefore, the initiates and the prophets bear witness of the light, though not directly partaking of its power to the extent of the demigods. According to the esoteric doctrines of Platonism, the demigods can never become men or descend to the level of mortality because they are of a different and higher order of creation. On the other hand, though man through discipline and enlightenment rises to a state approaching deification, he can never actually become one with the gods, for he must continue in the life stream of which he is a part. This does not mean that man will not ultimately attain to the state of divinity, but rather that he will create his own genus of gods. For the life of one creation can never become identical with the life of any other creation but must evolve its own vehicles of manifestation. The same law that prohibits man from becoming like the gods also prohibits the gods from becoming like man, even though they control and direct his destiny. In spite of its magnificent power and divine abundance of wisdom and understanding, the demigod is unable to build a physical body and hence must borrow one already prepared for its use. Such a body then becomes its oracle or shrine, and through it the demigod reaches the dwellers in the dark sphere of matter. Thus, when one of the demigods, or great devas, desires to communicate with mankind, it descends to the median line where, working through the plane of mind, the mediating principle, it overshadows a mortal who has raised himself to this exalted state, and through the higher vehicles of such a mortal contacts humanity. By thus overshadowing the mind of the mortal initiate, the deva causes him to think, speak and act according to the celestial will. The demigods must not be considered as personalities but rather as individualities, in that they function in substances too rarefied, free of gross physical elements, to permit the existence of personal organisms. The demigods are units of knowing, relatively superior to mortal men but incapable of molding physical matter except through the medium of mind. Supermen are personal beings who are gradually outgrowing personality. Though still limited by mortal bodies, they have learned to separate consciousness from form and function, temporarily at least, in the same substances that constitute the attenuated organisms of the demigods. Various Greek philosophers are said to have been overshadowed by gods or demons. Thus, Pythagoras was declared to be overshadowed always by the spirit of the Pythian Apollo, and Socrates likewise by a mysterious creature which he referred to as his god. Bringing with it certain great truths otherwise inaccessible to man, such a deity elevates the one so overshadowed to a position of unusual philosophic dignity. At this point it is necessary to remind the reader that the demigods, since they are part of the causal agencies which together constitute the spiritual world, are themselves in and of the spiritual natures of all creatures. Thus, man's own spirit is a demigod hovering over his lower organisms, which are as disciples receiving the instruction necessary to right living from the God within. In Oriental art, Arjuna is frequently shown receiving instruction from Krishna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Arjuna, the son of Kunti, the mortal man, is often represented as a diminutive figure, while above him in all the splendor of his azure radiance stands the blue Krishna. Here Arjuna represents the personal or mortal / and Krishna the demigod or oversoul upon whose instruction the mortal man depends for his inspiration to right action. Occasionally the spiritual and the material worlds are symbolized by two pyramids, one inverted with its base in the heavens and the other upright with its base upon the earth. The two pyramids meet at their apexes. The pyramid with its foundation in heaven decreases in size as it descends and is the proper symbol of the decreasing choirs of celestial beings, forces and intelligences, that descend in concatenated order from the effulgence of the 24th mystery, which is the first mystery from above. The upright pyramid with its foundation in matter indicates by its converging sides the gradual decrease of materiality until at its apex materiality vanishes. Occasionally a serpent is wound about the point where the two apexes meet, thus indicating the mystery of mind and the astral light, which is the blending of the superior and the inferior eons. This concatenated order of decreasing materiality and increasing spirituality forms the many-runged ladder rising from the darkness of oblivion below and the perfect light of celestial splendor above, and was the ladder that the angels ascended and descended in Jacob's vision. Man painfully climbs the many steps leading to the summit of the pyramid of material attainment, and upon reaching the apex finds himself at the foot of an incalculable flight of steps that leads upward to the very source of being. Upon this upper flight of steps stand the demigods, above them the gods, and around about the winged spirits who dwell in the middle distance and are the divine messengers. This entire picture must be considered, however, as a symbolic representation of the states and conditions of consciousness, intelligence and force, which by their orderly combinations bring all phenomena into manifestation. The figure accompanying this chapter sets forth in a diagrammatic manner the interplay of the three worlds forming the basis of Greek and Hindu philosophy. Once this point is comprehended, the entire structure of ancient thought is revealed. The circles, of course, merely represent vast areas of spiritual activity occupying the same place at the same time but separated from each other by the vibratory rates of their atomic particles. The white sphere represents the causal nature, the black sphere the material universe. It will be noted that the third, or intermediate sphere consists of a dotted area, the dots increasing in number below and decreasing in number above the horizontal line. The entire diagram is divided horizontally by a heavy line which represents the definite point of separation between the causal universe and the universe of effects. This diagram should be considered as applicable not only to cosmos but to every organism in the universe, which by its very existence demonstrates that it is composed of spiritual and material agencies combined as shown in the drawing. The ladder rising through the three worlds signifies the path of attainment that leads from darkness into light. That part of the ladder occupying the space below the central dividing line represents the mystery of water, which is purification. That part of the ladder above the central dividing line represents the mystery of fire, which is the baptism of the Spirit. Here is the key to the two baptisms of the Christian Gnostics, for John the Baptist is made to say, "I indeed baptize you with water unto repentance, but he that cometh after me, shall baptize you with the Holy Ghost and with fire." In this figure is thus set forth the entire purpose of the ancient mysteries and the processes of human regeneration. Here also is set forth a still greater mystery, the mystery of the dying God, with which we must now concern ourselves. The Augustinian, or outer, interpretation of the dying God mythos declares the martyr Savior to be the line descending from the dot to the circle which, falling into the darkness of the circumference, is swallowed up, or allegorically dies, by becoming immersed in the irrational sphere of matter. Man is declared to have two souls, or rather, two hypothetical phases of one soul consciousness. The first and superior is the rational soul, the second and inferior, the irrational soul. The rational soul is that part of man which is ever in awareness of divine and eternal self. The irrational soul is that part which, being incapable of retiring into the mysteries of self, mistakes the outer nature for the inner and assumes the objective man to be the real. The qualities of the rational soul are apperception, realization, comprehension and other higher mental and supramental faculties. The qualities of the irrational soul are external perception, ignorance, selfishness, lust, greed and kindred vices. The rational soul is necessarily unselfish because it conceives self to be distributed throughout the entire substance of being. Glimpsing the universal ultimates of life, the rational soul is not hypnotized by the illusion of a personal self and therefore, does not urge toward personal aggrandizement and accumulation. The irrational soul is fundamentally selfish because it conceives self to be isolated and the service and preservation of self therefore, becomes an all-important consideration. Sin and death are the masters of the irrational soul. Realizing the kinship of one with the all, the rational soul, however, attains immortality and omnipotence. Socrates defines man as a self-knowing being immersed in a not-knowing body. This is the outer mystery of the dying God slain for the sin of the world or, more correctly, by the sin of the world. Descending from the spiritual eons and dying by reason of immersion in the unknowing nature of the inferior creation, the self-knower becomes the motif of many allegories. A well-known example is that of Jonah being thrown overboard and swallowed by the hippocampus or mythological whale. Jonah, the knower, is immersed in the sea of illusion, life, and swallowed by Cetus, the Leviathan or monster of mortality. Saint Augustine explains the allegory differently, declaring the whale to symbolize God who, when the prophet was cast by men into the sea of tribulation, was accepted into the body of God and carried safely to shore. The 3 days that Jonah remained in the whale's belly, however, links the allegory definitely to the dying God myth, for according to the mysteries the rational soul is immersed for 3 days in the nature of the inferior sphere. Again, the irrational universe, the not-knowing part, is divided into 12 sections which are symbolized by the signs of the zodiac and called the 12 holy animals. These are the 12 parts of unreality. In the Greek mysteries they are called the Titans or primordial giants who took the body of Bacchus, the rational soul, and tearing it to pieces devoured the flesh. This signifies, in the terms of the Pythagoreans, that the one knower, the real part of every creature and the rational soul of the universe is destroyed and its integrity dissipated by multitude, represented by the Titans. Paracelsus calls man a composita, or a being composed of man and beast, a concept symbolized in the mysteries by the centaur who had the head and shoulders of a man and the body of a horse. Man is twofold, a rational nature rising out of an irrational nature, hence, the mystery of the dying God. The rational soul is the eternal martyr who awaits the day of his liberation, which can only be accomplished when man elevates himself above the level of material impulse. Bacchus torn to pieces by the Titans, Hades gored by the wild boar, Adonis dead at the foot of the pine tree, Orpheus slain by the Ciconian women, all these ancient martyrs represent the rationality of man falling a victim to the inconstancies of his inferior nature. Chiron, the centaur instructor of Achilles, has a different significance however, for here the centaur represents the godman with its head in the supreme world and its body in nature. The centaur is therefore one of the demigods overshadowing a highly evolved human soul. The irrational nature of man is well symbolized by the Cretan labyrinth where rules the Minotaur, the bull-headed lord of matter, the creature which most mistake for their own true self. Into this irrational sphere descends Theseus, who prevents himself from being lost in the tortuous passageways by unraveling behind him Ariadne's thread. The rational soul thus slays the beast man and becomes king of the country of its own life. So much for the exoteric significance of the dying God allegory. In the secret teachings it is written that mind itself is the Savior God. Mind is the martyr of the ages, the eternal and universal Prometheus sacrificed upon the altar of human necessity. Mind is the willing sufferer upon the tree. Mind must destroy itself that that which is greater than mind may endure. According to the mysteries, there comes that time in the quest of consciousness when man discovers the mind to be the slayer of the real. Then as he sloughs off his evil nature, he must slough off his mind that his consciousness may be disentangled from the infinite complex of the mental web. The mind is incapable of ascending to the state of consciousness. The mind can never completely annihilate the sense of separateness, for it depends upon comparison for its function and differentiation for its very existence. Consequently, though the mind is ever the link between consciousness and unconsciousness, it too must be ultimately sacrificed in order that the great work be accomplished. By the death of the mind consciousness is released to complete perfection, but woe unto him who slays the mind without that understanding which must be given out of the mysteries. The mind must not die until its own work has been completed and its function has reached the highest possible degree of perfection. As the mind increases in power and rationality, it grows gradually to realize that there is something beyond thought. The mind is capable of realizing this power but is never able actually to contact it. There is a supermental state which is synonymous to a certain extent with the causal sphere. The Buddhist sees consciousness as a universal sea. Consciousness is therefore something that is moved only by a divine ebb and flow, by a realization of itself. This universal, all-penetrating sea is the true substance of everything, for consciousness, or self, was before the beginning, and consciousness, or self, is after the end. Beginning and end are illusions, but self is eternal. Consciousness is therefore union with self. Consciousness knows no separateness. As long as me and thee exist, consciousness is not perfected. Life and death, good and evil, light and shadow, these are the illusions of mind. But in consciousness diversity is totally annihilated, and all things are one in reality and in essence. The bond of brotherhood is proved by the mind to be good, but the realization of brotherhood is not consciousness. The bond of friendship is demonstrated by the intellect to be necessary, but friendship is less than consciousness. There is no consciousness until the slash in each is one and indivisible from the slash in all. Until we are everything that we in our ignorance believe surrounds us, there is no complete consciousness. We may study the star intellectually, but we have never attained consciousness until we are the star, the stone, the heavens, and the earth. When our consciousness is perfect, we extend from the heights of height to the depths of depth, we permeate the whole nature of existence, we are in everything, we are through everything, we are the whole nature of everything. The difference between intellect and consciousness is therefore the difference between a mental concept of an object and an actual mingling of our consciousness with the consciousness of the object itself. This latter state is realization. The intellectual concept, however, must a certain degree precede the consciousness. As the mind is higher than the body and the body must ultimately accept the thinking organism as its master, so consciousness is higher than mind and the mind must ultimately give way to it. The mind is a bridge connecting consciousness and unconsciousness, but having crossed the bridge, it is left behind, its usefulness past. As a bridge, however, the mind is a vital necessity, and he who depreciates it is as false as he who permits himself to become the servant of its whims. The Buddhist priest entering into nirvana and the Brahmin bridging the chasm between mortal consciousness and samadhi, both cast aside mind as a snare and a delusion, yet without it the very principles upon which they work would be incomprehensible to them. The Eastern mind, endeavoring to annihilate the unreal and mingle itself with the real, depends first upon the intellect to reveal the processes of illumination and the reasonableness of their abstract conceptions. The Western schools of philosophy differ from the Eastern in that they teach the perfection of the mind before its rejection, whereas the Eastern schools are prone to regard the mind as a hindrance, to be discarded at the very beginning of spiritual growth. Thus, the Eastern mystic with his own nature slays the mind, while the Western philosopher, by elevating the mind to a realization of its own insufficiency, causes the intellect voluntarily to offer itself as a willing sacrifice upon the altar of spirit. The ability to feel with rather than for is the essential difference between consciousness and emotion. When we feel for things, we are emotionally moved. Pity, sympathy and kindred feelings stir us, and yet they seldom give any definite impulse that is of value in the adjustment of any chain of circumstances. When we feel with things, we are so much a part of them that we understand the innermost elements of their being. Thus, understanding comes with consciousness and knowledge with intellectual comprehension. According to the ancient doctrines, perfect consciousness, the ability to feel with everything as part of everything, was regarded as the ultimate state of so-called human unfoldment, and he who had achieved this had attained to godhood in his own right. The gods are simply emblematic of varying degrees of consciousness in that vast interval between ignorance and realization. At present humanity is semi-conscious, conscious over the area of the known and unconscious over the area of the unknown. We have reached a degree of consciousness that enables us to study the exoteric, or outer constitution of things. We will never know the urges, however, that cause the diversified phenomena of existence until we are united with the inner nature that animates the outer body. Consciousness is gauged, therefore, by our ability to unite ourselves with the soul urges of those creatures that surround us, and true greatness is measured by the power to come en rapport with the causes of objective manifestation. Many centuries ago, there was founded in Korea a group of Eastern thinkers of Buddhist persuasion who developed the science of realization to a higher degree than any group since Gautama himself. The story is told that to one of the monasteries of this order in Japan there came a disciple who dedicated his life to the attainment of this inner consciousness. Year after year he struggled to master the illusions of his outer nature and find the infinite and all-pervading self within. His patience was tireless, his devotion unwavering. Yet the passing years found no apparent improvement in his spiritual condition. He was never able to be one with all the life that surrounded him. After having spent the best part of a lifetime in wandering and meditation without reward, he finally returned to the little monastery, having decided that if he could not attain to consciousness life was useless and he would destroy himself. Just inside the monastery grounds was a tall tower, and climbing to the top the monk cast himself off with a silent hope that his search would end in the peace of death. While in the act of falling, consciousness came to him, and with it the realization that the earth below was so surely a part of himself that it would not injure him when he fell upon it. The result of this realization was that he landed on his feet uninjured after a fall which would have killed the ordinary man. His face radiant with the inner conviction that had come upon him, he rushed to the abbot of the monastery who had been his friend for many years, and bowing before the aged man exclaimed, "At last I know, Master, at last I know." Seeing the look of divine understanding upon the face of the mendicant, the abbot smilingly asked, "What do you know?" "I cannot tell you what I know, Master. There are no words, no thoughts that can express it. If you know, you must know as one know. I can make no revelation of it to any man." The abbot looked at him for a moment and then replied, "It is evident, my son, that you know. The fact that you cannot tell it is the proof that you possess it. Nothing of which we may speak can transcend the world of illusion, for words themselves were created to describe unrealities. Therefore, the unutterable is the real and the unthinkable is the true, the utterable is the false and the thinkable is the phantom of a dream." In this renaissance of the metaphysical we hear much of consciousness and understanding and spiritual realization. But one thing is certain and to be depended upon: he who possesses consciousness will make no effort to reveal it, for the very achievement brings with it a realization of the hopelessness of attempting to communicate the wonders of the self to a world that knows nothing of the contemplative life. People talk glibly of cosmic consciousness and unity with absolute being, but their very words belie the fact. A great Buddhist monk was once brought into the presence of the Emperor of China, and the Emperor addressed him thus, "Answer me, O servant of the enlightened, one question." And the saffron-robed sage replied, "Noble sire, what is your question?" The Son of Heaven answered, "Would know the end of things, the ultimate state." Daruma gazed upon him for a moment with a strange expression of mingled sadness and amusement, amused that any man should dare to ask in words that which no words can explain, sad that anyone should know so little as to ask so much. Finally, the sage answered, "O Emperor, bring me a potted plant." A servant brought one in, and the monk, looking at it for a second, said, "This is a rare porcelain, is it not?" "It is worth a fortune," replied the Emperor. Thereupon the sage dashed the potted plant to the hard floor, where it was shattered to bits. Filled with wrath the Emperor cried out, "Foolish one, what have you done?" "I have answered your question concerning the ultimate of things," the sage rejoined. "Words fail, thoughts fail, but in this way, I can give you evidence of that which must be evidenced by the self alone." For a time, the Emperor was buried in thought and then shook his head. "I do not understand," he said. "Alas," replied the sage, "alas, sire, I can do no more. During the progress of our lectures, we have been asked again and again to describe those spiritual processes by which the mystery of the self is to be revealed. If those who asked knew or realized the nature of their question, they would know that it is unanswerable by mortal man, and that he who even attempts to give an answer thrice proves his unfitness to possess the answer. Many are the paths of Dharma by which the law is revealed, and more than this of the law cannot be said. He who would know and comprehend must learn to think and dream and feel in the rhythm of universal concerns, leaving behind him the pettiness of personal affairs. To achieve to the end of Tao, he must exchange the rhythm of the senses for that vast ebb and flow of measureless eternity, for only when man ceases to be man is he not man. When he ceases to be a creature, when he ceases to think or to feel or to know, when he ceases to feel his kinship with the earth or the sky, when he is no longer mortal or immortal, when he is neither one with the grain of dust nor with the gods, when all conditions have passed away, when dimension and time have disappeared, when nothing remains except the all-pervading universal self, unthinkable, unknowable, transcendent and perfect, when the interval between the self and the self in all has been annihilated, when all these things are one and I am that one and yet one I am not, then the soul has ceased to be a soul and is self. Nirvana is reached when each finds himself to be all and rests forever in the state of not being, which is all being, indivisible and perfect. In Japan, the Tango no Seku, or Festival of the Boys, is a very important one and is celebrated annually early in May. Among the important symbols in evidence at this time is the paper flag or kite cut in the shape of a great fish. This banner is hollow, and the wind blowing into it causes the carp to become inflated and swim about in the air in a very lifelike manner. The ceremony of flying the carp had its origin in the ancient Chinese legend of the dragon carp. This fish, which swims with great resolution against the current, is considered in the Orient to be a fitting emblem of the soul of man swimming against the stream of illusion and striving to reach perfection despite the opposition of time and circumstance. The dragon carp, according to the legend, desired to swim against the Dragon Gate Rapids and again through its body into the air, only to be beaten back by the strength of the angry current. The gods, beholding the struggle of the carp, marveled at its patience and endurance, for it returned from each new defeat with fresh courage and determination to conquer the rapids. At last, with a supreme effort, the carp achieved its end, and when it reached the haven of the placid waters above the rapids, the body of the great fish glowed with a celestial splendor and became the symbol of the accomplishment of perfection. The gods gave the fish the lifespan of 1,000 years, and at the end of this period it was transfigured. Surrounded by streamers of divine radiance, it ascended into the heavens and became one of the immortals. In Buddhist symbolism, the achievement of the dragon carp fittingly symbolizes the attainment of nirvana. Again and again the human soul seeks to stem the tide of mortal fate. Heedless of worldly ridicule and misunderstanding, the mystic patiently continues his effort to clear the rapids of his own lower nature. At last, passing through the maelstrom of the lower self, he finds peace, and being transfigured ascends into the heavens to be united in nirvana with all creatures and all ages. The difference between the intellectual concept and consciousness lies in certain indescribable realities too deeply embedded in the nature of being to permit description. In the East, consciousness is likened to the lotus bud which, gradually opening, reveals more and more of itself to a wondering world until at last the golden heart in all its splendor is disclosed. Perfect consciousness to man is perfect realization of the nature and relationship of parts to the fundamental unity in which they exist. The ability to understand the actual order of being and to see everything correctly is to be conscious. To see things as they seem to be is to be subject to the illusions of the lower mind. An example of consciousness may be briefly summed up in the statement that to know the nature of all things is to realize that all things are good. To intellectually achieve this attitude is very simple, for it is only necessary to affirm continually that the thing is good, and after a while the mind, following the line of least resistance, accepts the affirmation as a fact and no longer questions the reality of that good. But there is a vast difference between convincing oneself intellectually of the goodness of things and becoming really conscious of the goodness of things. Consciousness is not the result of the mind convincing the self, consciousness is the result of the self convincing the mind. The mind incarnated in the Christos speaks of consciousness personified in the Father in these words: "The Father is greater than I, consciousness is greater than mind, which is born out of and is a limited expression of the Supreme Parent." What then did the Emperor Julian infer when he spoke of the sacred mysteries of the seven-rayed God who lifted souls to salvation through his own nature? Simply this: no more can reality descend to the level of ignorance than can the lesser of anything contain the greater. If man would grasp the infinite, it is therefore necessary for him to raise himself to the level of the infinite, and as he ascends the mystery becomes ever more clear. Universal mind is the seven-rayed Savior God through which man must ascend from the primitive state of darkened mindlessness to the perfect state of all-knowing mindlessness. Thus, mind is indeed the Savior God who leads the soul to the comprehension of self. But, as was true of Moses, the lawgiver of Israel, it is not written that mind shall enter into the promised land. Having led the children of Israel, the parts of the inferior nature, through the wilderness of sin to the portals of the gates of peace, the mind lies down among the bleak hills of Moab, its work accomplished, and rests in the law. His face illumined by the celestial radiance reflected from the sphere he can never fully understand, mind, the universal Savior, dies at the gate of nirvana while the souls he has redeemed pass on to perfection.
Thanks for watching the Wisdom Rocker. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.